All right, so get this. You wanted to learn about some demolitions happening in Baltimore, right?
Yeah.
Ones that have people talking about Johns Hopkins University and their commitment to the community.
It's definitely a hot topic.
We dove into this article from the Real News called Johns Hopkins University Sat on Unoccupied Apartments for Over a Decade Just to Demolish Them. And it's, well, it's pretty thought-provoking.
Yeah, it raises some eyebrows for sure.
So before we get into it, can you give us like a quick overview of what properties are we even talking about here?
Sure, so we're looking at 7 row houses on West 29th Street and a 14-story apartment building called the Dell House. Both of these are near the Homewood campus in Charles Village.
Okay, so like a decent amount of potential housing there.
Yeah.
So what's the timeline on Hopkins owning these buildings? It's not like they just bought them and immediately went demolished, right?
No, not exactly. It's actually kind of interesting. Hopkins acquired these properties over like 2 decades. The row houses, they started buying those back in 2000 and got the last one in 2019. The Dell House itself, they bought that in 2003.
Hold on. So they've owned these buildings for years, and they're just now deciding to demolish them. What gives?
Well, that's where things get kind of murky. The article quotes Jill Rosen. She's Hopkins' media relations director. She says rehabilitating the buildings is infeasible because of their condition.
Infeasible.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if they even tried to, keep them up over the years.
Right. Like if they let the properties just fall apart, doesn't that contradict their whole community commitment thing?
Exactly. And to make it even weirder, their reason for the demolition is to create green space.
Yeah, green space.
Yeah.
But get this, the buildings are already right next to the 16-acre park called Wyman Park Dell.
So they're demolishing potential housing to create more green space when there's already a huge park. Something doesn't add up here.
Definitely raises some questions about their priorities.
Okay, let's talk about how much housing we're actually talking about. Row houses and a 14-story apartment building. That's got to be a lot of units.
Oh yeah, for sure. The Dell House alone has 37 units. And the row houses, they could probably fit at least 30 more, so almost 70 units just sitting empty.
In a city with a housing crisis.
Yeah.
And they're tearing them down. It's mind-boggling. And we haven't even gotten to the human side of this yet.
And that's where it gets even more concerning. The article quotes a man experiencing homelessness who was using the vacant buildings on 29th Street for shelter. He talks about being constantly forced to move, searching for a safe place to stay.
That's just heartbreaking. It feels like a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
If they really wanted to show their commitment to the community, wouldn't addressing the need for affordable housing be a better way to go?
You'd think so, right? But the article says Hopkins actually used the presence of homeless individuals on the properties as part of their justification for demolition.
Wow. So they're using the very problem they could help solve as a reason to demolish the buildings. It's just, I don't know, just feels wrong.
It's definitely a complex situation with a lot of layers.
Yeah. I mean, I get the need for progress and development, but demolishing potentially usable housing just seems like a step backwards, especially when you consider the people who are being affected.
It's about more than just bricks and mortar. It's about people's lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
We definitely are. We need to look into this idea of green gentrification and understand the financial side of things like real estate speculation, and then see how all of this impacts the community as a whole when a big institution like Johns Hopkins is involved.
That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm a little fired up about this. So let's dive into those details next. This conversation is far from over. You mentioned green gentrification before. Can you, remind me what that is again?
Yeah, so basically it's the idea that creating green spaces, which is usually seen as a good thing, can sometimes lead to people being displaced and housing costs going up.
Right. Because if a neighborhood suddenly becomes more desirable because of new parks, property values go up.
Exactly. And then longtime residents get priced out. They can't afford the higher rents or property taxes.
So in this case, Hopkins could actually be contributing to gentrification in Charles Village by demolishing these buildings and creating more green space.
It's a possibility, especially since they're already right next to that big park. It just seems like they're focusing more on aesthetics than on the actual needs of the community.
And this all ties back to real estate speculation, too.
Yeah. We talked about it before, but maybe we can dig a little deeper into how it applies to this specific situation.
Yeah, please. I'm still a little fuzzy on that.
Okay, so think about it this way. Hopkins has had these properties for years doing nothing with them right. So maybe they've just been waiting for the right time to redevelop the land when the area becomes more upscale and they can get more money.
So they're not just creating green space. They're creating valuable real estate that they can cash in on later.
Potentially.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what their real motivations are.
It's easy to get caught up in all the financial stuff. But I keep thinking about that man in the article who is using those buildings for shelter. This isn't just about property values of green space. It's about people's lives.
Absolutely. And it's about the consequences of these decisions. You know, when a big institution like Johns Hopkins makes a move like this, it sends a message.
What kind of message?
A message about what's important to them, what they value, and how those priorities might not align with what the community actually needs, especially the most vulnerable people.
It's almost like they're saying, this is our vision for the neighborhood. And if you can't afford it, too bad.
Right. And it raises the question of who's holding them accountable. How can we make sure that institutions like this are actually benefiting the community and not just themselves?
That's a big question. So what can we do about it? Is this just a case of big guys always win?
Not necessarily. There are ways to push back and to advocate for more fairness and justice.
Like what? Give me some hope here.
Well, first of all, talking about it helps. Raising awareness, sharing information, getting people engaged. The more people understand what's going on, the more pressure there is to change things.
So we're doing something good right now just by talking about it on this podcast.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. And these conversations can help to challenge the status quo.
Okay, that's good. What about actual actions people can take, like concrete steps?
Well, there are a lot of organizations in Baltimore working on affordable housing and homelessness. Supporting them is huge, whether it's donating, volunteering, or just spreading the word.
Yeah, it's easy to feel helpless when you see these huge problems.
Yeah,
But even small actions can make a difference, right?
absolutely. And don't forget about your own voice. Contact your elected officials, let them know that these issues matter to you, and hold them accountable for making positive changes.
Right. And vote. We need to elect leaders who actually care about creating a more just and equitable city.
It's a multi-pronged approach. Awareness, education, advocacy, action, all working together to create real change.
I needed to hear that. It's not about feeling hopeless. It's about turning that frustration into something positive.
Exactly. And change takes time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But by staying engaged, staying informed, and staying committed, we can make a difference.
I like that. It's not about quick fixes. It's about sustained effort and believing that we can create a better future.
And sometimes it starts with asking tough questions, challenging assumptions, and demanding more from those in power.
Well, we've definitely been asking a lot of questions today. It's crazy how this one article about demolitions in Baltimore has led to this whole conversation about gentrification and speculation and the role of big institutions.
It shows how even things that seem small can reveal deeper problems that are worth exploring.
It's all connected. And I
Yeah.
think that's a perfect way to transition into the final part of our deep dive where we can look at the bigger picture and what this all means for cities today.
I'm ready to go deeper. Let's
Yeah.
keep this conversation going.
So we've covered a lot of ground, green gentrification, real estate speculation, the role of institutions, but I feel like there's still more to think about.
Absolutely. This situation with Johns Hopkins, it's kind of a small-scale version of what we see happening in cities all over the country when it comes to development.
Yeah, and the article brings up the Bell Foundry in Baltimore. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It was a cool art space,
Yeah.
but it got shut down in 2016 because they said it wasn't safe, and then later they redeveloped the whole thing.
Right. It makes you wonder if sometimes those safety concerns are just an excuse to push people out and make way for something that will make more money.
Yeah, especially when you look at the bigger picture of how cities are developing. And there's also that vacant bank building in Station North. The article mentions that the owner seems to be holding on to it, waiting for the right time to sell. Meanwhile, the arts district is struggling.
It's like this disconnect between what the city says it wants for an area and what's actually happening.
Like they want a thriving arts district, but then they make it impossible for artists to actually afford to live and work there.
It all comes down to power and money, and how those things often outweigh the needs of the community.
So what does this all mean for us? For everyday people trying to understand these complicated issues?
I think the most important thing is to be critical thinkers, to look beyond the surface and question what we're being told.
Like when we hear things like creating green space or safety concerns, we should dig a little deeper and ask, who really benefits from this and who loses out?
Exactly. And we need to see how all these issues are connected. Gentrification speculation, the influence of big institutions, it's all part of a system that often puts profit before people.
And this isn't just a Baltimore thing, right? These same patterns are happening in cities everywhere.
For sure. So what can we do about it? We can stay informed to talk about these issues and hold our elected officials accountable.
We can support organizations that are fighting for things like affordable housing and community development. and advocate for policies that prioritize people over profit.
It's about understanding that we have a voice and that we can help shape the future of our cities.
I've learned so much from this conversation, and I hope our listeners have too.
We've just scratched the surface, but I hope it's made people curious and encouraged them to think critically.
If you want to learn more, definitely check out the full article from the Real News. It's a great read.
And let us know what you think. What parts of this resonated with you? What questions do you have? Let's keep the conversation going.
That's it for this deep dive. But keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep digging deeper. We'll see you next time.